I am Dr. Joanne Yanez, and I'm the Executive Director for the Association of Accredited Naturopathic Medical Colleges. Today we are going to be talking about stress. And so before we do that, I just want to go through a few quick housekeeping things. So on the right-hand side is a control panel, and that has a question box in it. And so Dr. Lichtenstein, who's joined us today for the webinar, will be speaking for about a half an hour. And after that, he will go through a question and answer session. So any questions you have for the speaker, please use the question box and put them in there, and we will answer those as best we can. Before I begin, I'd like to introduce our speaker for the day. And honestly, it's hard to do a 23-year career in naturopathic medicine justice in just a couple seconds, but Dr. Lichtenstein has had a number of different hats throughout his career and profession. He is currently associate and clinical professor at Bastyr, has spearheaded their MindBody Medicine department as well, and has worked with just a diverse patient population over the years, incorporating both mind and body practices. He is board certified in biofeedback, and for me personally, this topic is really, really vital. Stress is just ubiquitous. It is part of the fiber and the fabric of life, and how we manage that is really important. And so as medical students, both for your patients as well as for your own mental health and well-being, I think that this webinar is really important, and I hope that you get a lot out of it. And so with that, I turn over the screen to Dr. Lichtenstein. Welcome and thank you.
Thank you. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay, great. Hi. So I just wanted to introduce myself. I was going to try to do a live. I was trying to exit this for a second just so you could see me. I just wanted to say hi to everyone, and I'm going to go back to the slides. But so just so you know, there's a live person here. So we're going to talk about stress, and the way I talk about stress really is to use the breath. And so I love this quote from Mary Oliver. Listen, are you breathing just a little and calling it a life? So before we even go any further, I'd just like you to take a moment and notice how you're breathing. It seems like such a simple function. It's a basic, simple function, but as we're going to talk about, it can really impact your health completely. So as we were always talking about, stress is ubiquitous. Can we become addicted to stress? Has been a headline that I have all these slides back there. It was on Time in Good Morning America. CNN talks about addiction to stress. It keeps coming up over and over and over. And now we're even talking about school stress. So how do we manage and deal with that? My definition of stress is quite simply this. I like to talk about this all the time. The confusion created when one's mind overrides the body's basic desire to choke the living daylights out of someone who desperately needs it. But of course, we don't do that. So another way to talk about stress, it's a great book by Robert Sapolsky. I do recommend anyone who is interested in healthcare in general read this, Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers. And to talk about stress, we're seeing that a lot of diseases are diseases. Many times as naturopaths, we talk about diseases of lifestyle. But I like to take it a step further. A lot of diseases are because we activate a physiological system in our body that has been evolved to respond to acute physical emergencies. But we keep that active for days, for weeks, for months. And that happens when we think about mortgages, relationships, school exams, tests. And so when we just think about these things, we're activating a physiological system that was really designed to help us fight or flee or get away from danger. When you wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning thinking about your mortgage, how are you fighting or fleeing there? There's really not much to get away from. So how do we manage all of these things? Our body is responding to these drives to fight or flee, to survive, and there's really nothing we can fight or flee in that moment. So this is what we're going to be talking about. One of the most basic primary ways to regulate that physiological system is to breathe. I love talking about breathing because we really speak in breathing metaphors. So breathing really reflects how we're living and, as I like to say, how we're orienting to our life. We can feel inspired. The word inspiration comes from the Greek inspiritus, to breathe in spirit, to breathe in life. You know, if we do not feel inspired, if we feel uninspired, what's that mean? We might not be breathing properly. Someone's a breath of fresh air, or we actually breathe a sigh of relief. And even if you're sitting here listening to this right now, if you just did that, notice how that feels physiologically. When something makes you catch your breath, it's almost feeling inspired. And when we don't have any room to breathe, what's that doing to our physiology? So take a moment again and just notice how you're breathing. So I supervise our MindBody Medicine shifts at Bastyr Center for Natural Health, and I also have an on-campus resiliency and stress reduction shift. And the first thing that we do with every single person that walks in is explore how they're breathing. And so many people think breathing is easy. We've done it all the time. We don't need to learn. But it's important to think about breathing. Now, I'm just going to talk a little bit about what we do at the Bastyr Center for Natural Health and on our resiliency program. We talk to people about functional breathing. Now, this slide talks about some symptoms of hyperventilation. So when I talk about hyperventilation, almost everyone thinks about acute hyperventilation. That's in panic attack, and you all know what that's like. You see somebody who's going really breathing rapidly. And what's the treatment for that? The treatment for that is to breathe into a paper bag. We breathe into a paper bag, and that actually helps us recycle carbon dioxide. So most of the people who have a number of symptoms that we work with in the clinic don't have acute hyperventilation. They're not going, but they suffer from chronic hyperventilation. And chronic hyperventilation can look a number of ways. It can look like sighing a lot. It can look like taking in a deep breath and holding it. You know, sometimes when people are saying they're waiting to exhale, they take in a big breath in, hold it. It can also look like frequent yawning. Now, I say this every single day to my patients and in the clinic and to the students. And people say, well, I'm just tired. That's why I'm yawning. Well, sadly, most of the people that I work with are really tired. And we can talk about sleep hygiene, and that's an important thing. But these are a number of symptoms right here. And talking about our physiology, if we breathe dysfunctionally, meaning we breathe in more oxygen and breathe out too much carbon dioxide, we hyperventilate. So let me say that again. If we breathe in too much oxygen, big inhales, or blow off too much carbon dioxide, we hyperventilate. And here's this list. Look at this list. After 3 minutes, just 3 minutes of hyperventilating, and again, it doesn't have to be like that major acute hyperventilation. These are symptoms that could happen. Your heart could beat faster. You might find that you're not able to concentrate. Your vision can get blurred. I'm looking at the bottom of that. But you can also get muscle spasms and pains, tightness. This could even lead to more asthma symptoms and other problems with your cardiovascular health. Again, this is immediate symptoms, 3 minutes. These are longer term symptoms. So if you are a chronic hyperventilator and you find that you breathe really quickly, so really rapidly, or take bigger breaths in, your inhale is longer than your exhale, these are some symptoms that can develop. And these are the symptoms that I work with. So naturopaths love to talk about treating the whole person, not treating the symptom. And as you can see these, we have panic attack, anger issues, attention deficit, memory issues, epilepsy, even epilepsy, hypertension, cardiac arrhythmias, irregularities in the heart rate, constipation, and you can see the list goes on. I'm here to say that if we want to treat these symptoms rather than, or treat the whole person, we don't just treat these symptoms. Naturopaths, we don't want to just give something for sinusitis. We want to treat the whole person. And in my worldview, that's teaching people to breathe. Now, this is a famous image by Scott Wood that appears in every biofeedback conference I go to. Biofeedback, if you didn't know, is the process of giving the individual feedback about their physiological symptoms. So we hook people up to a number of different sensors, some that can measure their brain waves, some that can measure their sweat, their respiration rate, their heart rate, their temperature. And through a monitor on a screen, the person can see in real time what's happening to them. And that's biofeedback. So then the person can make adjustments. This is a functional MRI scan of someone who's breathing normally. And on the left, you can see all those yellow places that light up. That's when the brain is active. But when someone hyperventilates, just after 3 minutes, you can see that many parts of the brain go dark. So this image is circulated a lot in biofeedback land. So breathing can affect your brain function. And if your brain goes dark like that on the right, you're not going to be able to process or think clearly. This is a famous questionnaire. It's called the Nijmegen Questionnaire, and you can find these online. There's several that will just score it for you. This Nijmegen Questionnaire is symptoms. These are neurological symptoms that result from chronic hyperventilation. And as that slide shows, some studies suggest that maybe about 4 to 10% of the general population hyperventilate on a chronic basis. However, some hospital studies say that it's much higher than that. But here's a number of questions that indicate people who hyperventilate. And you can Google this and find this online and find out if you're a hyperventilator. If your score is greater than 23, you might be a hyperventilator. Okay, so what I've talked about are all these symptoms that could happen from just dysfunctional breathing. So what do we teach? What do I teach? The main thing that I'm working with people with all those symptoms listed above or who are hyperventilators is slow-paced breathing. And you'll learn in medical school, you'll look in medical texts, they say that normal breathing range is between 14 to 18 breaths per minute. But what we teach is slow, paced breathing in the range of about 6 breaths per minute. That's about a 5-second inhale and a 5-second exhale. Now, one of the key things about breathing is we don't want our inhale ever to be longer or of a larger volume, because as I mentioned before, that would be hyperventilation. So we're talking about a 5-second inhale, a 5-second exhale, or some people prefer the exhale to be a little bit longer. So that would be about a 4-second inhale and a 4-second inhale and 6-second exhale. And this does a number of things for the body. It helps improve our body's ability to use oxygen. It helps us get the blood to flow to the areas properly and get it saturated properly. It helps us tolerate exercise and prevents shortness of breath. So it's really important to practice slow-paced breathing. Another term for this is called resonant breathing. And we call it resonant because of oscillation. You know, when we inhale, our heart rate will increase. And we're going to do this in a second. I'm going to have you guys do your own little biofeedback exercise if you'd like. But when we inhale, our heart rate increases. And when our heart rate increases, our blood pressure rises about 5 seconds later, just naturally. It's around 5 seconds. There's something called the baroreceptors. These are stretch receptors that recognize the rise in blood pressure, and then they fire, and when we exhale, our heart rate decreases. So there's this natural oscillating system that happens with our heart rate and our blood pressure. You don't really need to remember that, but when we breathe at this rate of 5 seconds in and 5 seconds out, we're stimulating the whole nervous system to work in concert together. And when we breathe this way, we can actually prevent hyperventilation. What's really interesting is yogis and Zen meditators, when they're studied, are found to breathe around 6 breaths per minute. There was an interesting study done with people who do the rosary, and they were showing how it really helped. Doing the rosary every day helped people decrease their stress, and they found that their whole nervous system, their heart rate decreased, their blood pressure dropped. What they found was the people who were doing the rosary, even reciting it silently, were breathing at a rate of about 6 breaths per minute. So the 6 breaths per minute, this resonant breathing, is so powerful that actually that picture down there is called the Respirate. It's the first FDA-approved biofeedback device for essential hypertension. So, and I'm going to make this grand statement. I always get nervous when practitioners say this. There's not one person we have worked with at the Bastyr Center for Natural Health. There's not one person I've worked with in private practice who had essential hypertension, which means it was not caused by any other physiological problem. It wasn't caused because of medication. There's not one person who had essential hypertension who did not have a reduction in their blood pressure in office when we taught them to breathe about 6 breaths per minute. And that's what the Respirate does. There's that band that goes around the belly, and it measures how fast you're breathing, and then there's headphones. And what it does is over the 20-minute period, it slowly coaches you to drop your breathing rate down to about 6 breaths per minute. And so the problem, though, is if you don't keep practicing, the blood pressure might not stay down. But it's a really important thing. So breath, it's free. Now, this is a graph. This top line in blue is a breathing wave. So I had a patient who had a respiration belt around his diaphragm, and this is him breathing. You could see that there was a big breath there, and then there's these little breaths, and it's not really regular or consistent. The red graph is of his heart rate. Now, this is just a 1-minute sample. My patient was looking at his Facebook account while he was doing this. And as you can see, there's these 3 spikes. His heart rate went up to 150 just for a second, and then came back down again. But you can see that as he was breathing this way, his heart rate went up and down. I then suggested he practice even breathing. Now this is him breathing, and you can see that the breathing line, that blue line, got really consistent, nice and even. But he was breathing around 11 breaths per minute. And so it's going up and down, but and each breath was about the same. So no inhale was longer than the exhale. And then you can see his heart rate down there. And his heart rate is going up and down. And it's around 60 beats per minute goes down. It's measuring each second and what the heart rate would be. Then I told him to breathe at his paced breathing, around 6 breaths per minute. This is 6 breaths per minute. And this, as you can see, is where his heart, see the red line below it? Notice how it's becoming more like a wave, a sine wave. It's going up and down. So when he breathes in, the heart rate's going up. And when he breathes out, his heart rate's going down. And you can see that. It's this nice sine wave. And the peak of each heart rate is in line with the peak of a breath. And this is something called respiratory sinus arrhythmia. It's a natural breathing arrhythmia. It's a natural thing. And it's the basis of the whole biofeedback program that we do at Bastyr. So this is a natural, functional breathing. So I'm going to invite you just for a moment. if you know how, if you can feel your radial pulse, your pulse at the side of your wrist on the thumb side, and if you can feel it, and if you can't feel that, you can also feel your pulse at in your neck at the carotid. And I know I say something about breathe in for 3 beats and then exhale. What I'd like you to do first is, and I'm going to go back to the slide, take a big breath in. Take a big breath in and hold it. And notice what happens to your pulse. Can you feel the space between your pulse? And then take a slow exhale. If you do this over time, what you will begin to feel is that as you inhale, your heart rate goes up, and as you exhale, your heart rate goes down. And this is respiratory sinus arrhythmia. It's also known as heart rate variability. It's the variability in your heart rate. One of the practices I give people as a stress reduction buster is just to feel their pulse and to breathe in and count 3 beats. Inhale for 3 beats, and exhale for 3 beats. And that might feel really fast. When 3 beats become easy, increase it to 4, 5, and even 6. And the further you go out, if you're breathing in for 5 beats and then exhaling for 5 beats, you will begin to feel this respiratory sinus arrhythmia. You'll begin to feel this change in your heart rate. So this is the MindBody Medicine shift at Bastyr. This is the one we're doing on campus. This is our resiliency and stress reduction shift. And this is what we're doing. For 8 weeks, we are teaching people how to breathe and then using the breath to regulate their entire nervous system. And what I didn't say about that is when we breathe in, our sympathetic nervous system is increasing. And as we're exhaling, our parasympathetic nervous system is firing. So one of the worst things you can say to anybody who's really stressed is like, take a deep breath in, because you're just increasing that sympathetic nervous system. So here's just a few of the patients that we worked with. And me and my team at the Bastyr campus. We worked with a 20-year-old pre-med student who had difficulty concentrating, a male naturopathic medical student in his mid-20s who had anxiety for 10 years, insomnia, and also difficulty concentrating. We worked with a psychology student in her 30s who had depression and insomnia and chronic low back pain, an admin assistant with arthritis and IBS, a supervisor in her 40s with lifelong anxiety and chronic neck pain, as well as dizziness and headaches, and a supervisor in her 70s with hypertension. Every single one of these patients, after 8 weeks, reported their Nijmegen Questionnaire. Remember that questionnaire that had those neurological symptoms? I said that 23. All of these individuals specifically had Nijmegen scores over 30, and at the end of 8 weeks, they dropped to the low 20s or the teens. Everyone reported decrease in anxiety, in fatigue, in all of these symptoms. I know when you hear these things, it's almost like, oh, here's these miracle cures. I must say that each of these patients came in every week for 8 weeks, and every one of these patients practiced breathing for 20 minutes twice a day. Now, sometimes they would miss the second time, but almost all of these patients practiced 20 minutes twice a day. This is just an outline of what we did with our patients. I'll just go over like the first session we just did an assessment, but it was the second and third session that we first started with posture. We really taught people how to sit up properly, because what we find is if you can't sit up properly, then you can't breathe diaphragmatically. So we really worked on posture, giving them exercises, adjustments to help them sit up properly. And then we started paced breathing, 6 breaths per minute, and we kept training this. So the backbone of all of this was paced breathing, around 6 breaths per minute, And then in session 5, 6, and 7, we started adding things like guided visualization, imagining breathing in through the heart. And we also did some emotional desensitization, having them think about their stressor while pacing their breath and slowly learning to desensitize to their emotional stressors, such as exams, such as a boss coming into the office. One of the patients, the very first one on that list, in her 20s was pre-med, and she was saying that every time she would go to an exam, when there was a question that was not on, that the teacher did not talk about, that was on her exam, she got so frustrated, she would just leave the room in tears. And so what we did was teach her paced breathing, and then we had her imagine being in an exam. In fact, once the resident on shift gave her a chemistry exam, and at first when she saw the exam, she started to go, I can't do this, and started to get upset. But we showed her her breathing and said, just, can you go back to your breathing? And she did. And all of a sudden her heart rate got very regular and very even, and she sailed through that chemistry exam, even though she wasn't expecting it. So this is part of what we're doing. So I'm just flying through these slides. These are a number of slides that talk about heart rate variability, that change in heart rate, and show that it's a really good marker for stress and health, that it's a good marker about survival post heart attack, that it can help people with depression during menopause, 2 of those studies. It's a great clinical measure about just overall health. And there's even studies that show low heart rate variability is associated with increased mortality and morbidity. So, as a naturopath, we want to help all of our patients. And I'd like to say, let's start with basics. We always talk about diet and nutrition and food. I think it's really important because we're putting so much food into our body. But we put 6 times the weight of air, 6 times the weight of food in our body through air. So why don't we talk about how we're breathing? And this is just another study that showing heart rate variability predicts a 30-day all-cause mortality. So what I'm saying is that we can train heart rate variability through slow-paced breathing. You don't need to respirate. You need to know how to count. You need to sit upright and change your breathing. And I believe this really will help with stress. Since we are talking about breathing, I just want to end with these 2 other slides that there's an oil for that. There's several studies right now that have been coming out showing that essential oil of lavender is a great anxiolytic. It helps with anxiety. So I'd like to say, if there is a favorite oil you have, why not breathe while you're breathing in that smell? So I'm going to open this up to questions. But the first thing I just want to impart and make sure we talk about is don't overlook the breathing. How we breathe impacts our entire nervous system, everything. And so we often think about that. And no one has to know that you're breathing. You could be sitting in an exam and you could be feeling your pulse and just counting your pulse and breathing in and out. It will regulate your entire nervous system, your sympathetic and parasympathetic. And there is even some studies to suggest that slow-paced breathing can impact the prefrontal cortex, the part of our brain that allows us to increase our executive function and to be calm and think. And when the prefrontal cortex is activated, it decreases our fear center, our amygdala. So breathing this way can actually reduce a lot of our stress. So I just wanted to open that up for any questions you had. I know this is just a very cursory overview.
Thank you. Thank you so very much. Before we go to question and answer, I was hoping maybe you could share just a little bit about why MindBody Medicine, you went to naturopathic school, you became a naturopathic doctor, but what was your passion? Why was MindBody Medicine and the things that you do now with patients, why did that interest you?
Yeah, great question. I became a naturopath because I really wanted to look at how we could heal without needing to take anything like supplements. Now, I'm not against supplements. I use them. But I wanted to know how we could just heal with basic things like food. I was a vegetarian for years, but I was an ovo-lacto vegetarian. I ate a lot of dairy. But growing up, I had a lot of GI problems. They said I had IBS and all these other things. And it wasn't until I was in college when I ended up in the hospital 3 times that I found a book on healing with whole foods. And the author said that many people could be allergic to dairy. I gave up dairy and all my GI pain went away, all the stuff that I had for years. So that intrigued me, and that's what started me into the route of naturopathic medicine. But when I became a naturopath, I found that we could do all these supplements, but it's really about how we orient to the world. It's how we work in relationship. I started my career doing HIV care, and this was at a time before many of the new HIV medications. And our visits were an hour and a half to 2 hours. 10, 20 minutes of that was spent on the biochemical stuff. The rest of it was really talking about how we are living and how we are orienting to the world, how we are, stressing ourselves. I then actually worked on a oncology research study with University of Washington and Bastyr, where we were looking at end of life, quality of end of life. So it was a hospice study where I went to the bedside of hospice patients, and I did over 500 bedside hospice meditations, and I guided people through these twice a week until they died. And that was amazing to me. I saw people who were in chronic severe pain. I saw them physically and emotional pain. And in that 20 minutes of meditation, I saw the most amazing things happen. People's breathing changed, people's pain decreased. It came back when we stopped the meditation sometimes. Sometimes it would persist for a long time. So that really solidified the power of this connection. It's not mind over body. The mind-body is one thing. When we breathe, we're affecting the nervous system, the way we breathe. So it's not just one thing over the other. It's a connection. The mind is the body is the mind. And so if I want to start with the least force, this is why I want to do mind-body medicine. How we orient to the world, think, breathe, sit, really has tremendous power. And so that's what really got me into that.
Thank you so much for sharing that. You have taught many, many hundreds of students over your career. Is there anything that you wish you knew, or any pearls of advice that you would give students who are thinking about a career in naturopathic medicine?
That's a great question. Well, the question, the thing that I would say to the students, especially like with the students that I'm working with now, is you will learn it. You don't need to know everything right now. It's called a medical practice. We go into a medical practice, not a medical perfect. We continue to learn and grow. And I see a number of students who come into school going, oh, I got to know everything right now. And you'll learn it. That's why there's years of education. And this speaks to the mind-body connection, that I find that when we can be more gentle with ourselves, when we can be more compassionate with ourselves, we can learn more, and we can settle into our learning. I would also, so that's just the compassion piece, I'd also recommend really seeking out people outside of your institution. It could be somebody in your institution, but someone that really resonates with you. Seek out, look and explore everything. You're not going to get everything from your school. There's other things and other people outside of the school that can be great mentors and guides. But really see if you can form good relationships with someone outside of the school, even in the school, to be a mentor and go and talk to them about the questions you have, bug them. People do that to me all the time. So I think that would really help with your learning. It's not just what's in the school.
I fully agree with that. When folks ask me about advice, and that is usually the first thing that I say is seek out mentorship. You don't have all the answers. Find people you trust and bounce off your ideas off of that network that you've built around. When I was doing my master's in public health, one of the studies that stood out to me was around social support and the impact of social support on health outcomes, and how often your supportive network can either make your illness worse and your experience worse, or make it better. And so I think through mentorship as well as supportive networks, that is really vital. So there's a question here about the hospice meditation work that you spoke of. Can you speak a little bit more about that? And is that something that students at Bastyr become involved in?
No, I have helped people, Bastyr students, actually connect with many of the hospices that I know in the area. And so some of my students have become hospice volunteers. That was a 3-year study, so it's not ongoing anymore. It was a tremendous experience. It was a 30-minute meditation that I would do twice a week. The reason it's not ongoing is many of the hospices don't know how to pay for that. So there's a lot of this is a whole other conversation. I could talk about my work in hospice and end-of-life care, but a lot of this is financial issues. I mean, but it was an amazing experience. And so if you are interested in end-of-life care, I really do recommend, no matter where you are, what school, see if you can get involved with the local hospices. You will learn a lot about how to be with people. And I think that's a great experience too.
Thank you. Can you speak a little bit about biofeedback training that you completed, as well as some reputable sources for continuing education on biofeedback?
Yes. So I am BCIA board certified. BCIA is the Biofeedback Certification International Alliance. It is the main certification body in the United States, well, actually internationally now. To become biofeedback certified, you need to take an approved 42-hour biofeedback didactic class, and then you need to have so many hours of mentorship. At Bastyr and the Bastyr Center for Natural Health, I am board certified, and in our San Diego campus, Dr. Cindy Hope is board certified, and we also have I've helped a number of naturopaths get certified. So we have 2 other naturopaths in Seattle who also are board certified. So I teach an ongoing elective that's board certified, but you can go to the bcia.org's website and find a number of classes that are approved to get that certification. Luckily, here at Bastyr, here in Kenmore, Seattle, and in San Diego, we do have supervisors that you can then count your clinic shifts as your for your mentorship hours. So that's a great opportunity at Bastyr that we've been doing in the past 10 years. So you can also find a mentor on the bcia.org website. It doesn't have to be through the schools. But I've done that. So I'm board certified in general biofeedback, but I'm also board certified in heart rate variability, which is a specialty in the biofeedback. So I offer continuing ed classes, and there's a number of them that are really reputable. But again, I would check with bcia.org for that. And it's a great skill to have. It really complements naturopathic medicine very well. We have a number of our faculty at the clinic here refer people to us. And as I said earlier, I'm going to make the grand claim that if you're working with someone with essential hypertension, if you're not teaching them how to breathe, I think that's a misstep. before you talk about diet, before you talk about herbs, I think breathing is essential.
Thank you so much. So I have a question here that is a little bit of an on-the-spot question, and I told you I wasn't going to do that, but this one I think is relevant.
Okay.
So the question is, if you had to do it over again, would you still study naturopathic medicine?
You said you weren't going to do that.
Breathe.
Breathe. And my students do that to me all the time. They always do that. Are you breathing? I'm like, no, I'm not. Which is fair. I went to naturopathic medical school 29 years ago. I started, it was a whole different world. There were only 30 people in my class. When I went, it didn't cost as much as it does now. So, I mean, one of my main concerns is the financial repercussions of the education. I was planning to go to University of Chicago. I actually was accepted to University of Chicago to their MD PhD program, and I drove up there, was sitting in the parking lot for hours, and turned around and went back to Pittsburgh, and didn't know where I was going to go. And this was before the days of the internet, and I did have an acupuncturist who told me about, I think I've said this to some people, this bastard place out in Seattle, and so I had to go to the library to find it. I love naturopathic medicine. I do. We have a therapeutic order where we talk about the different stages, using the least force, and then building up to what is necessary. I think it's a wonderful system of medicine. And if I were to go back at the same time I did, I would go back. So I feel reluctant to answering that question.
Sure.
And I say this the same thing. It's like my patients will say, what would you do? Would you go on this medication, or would you do this? It's like, I can never answer that because I don't have the same background. I don't have the same life experience. So everyone is different. I will say I do value and appreciate this medicine. And I would say that I think, like one of these old timers, I like the old days. There were 30 people in my class and we stayed in the same room. So scheduling was a lot easier. Do you like how I'm dodging? I'm kind of answering and dodging the question.
Okay. That's totally okay. I think, if I were to answer this question as well, I went to school, I started, in 1996. And so, naturopathic medicine was different back then, and the information that you had was different. I think, though, and I think of this personally, like not only has the medicine that I learned helped countless patients over the years, and students, and folks that I've personally, but I think myself, because I was training to go the conventional medical route as well. Had I not learned the tools that I learned in naturopathic medical school for myself, I would be a very sick human right now. And I probably would have ended up pretty sick with the habits and the things that I was doing, and the way that I was eating, and the way that I was processing stress, and all of the things that I learned through the course of naturopathic medicine for my patients actually became my own practice. And so I think that hindsight can always be 20/20, and we hear very consistently from students that cost is a concern. But I will also say on the flip side of that this is an investment. It's not only an investment in your career and your future, but it's an investment in yourself. And there are plenty of folks who are making it work, and they're paying back their loans, and they're doing really well. So the one thing that I will say on the cost perspective of all of this is, if you are concerned about that, there are ways of making it work. Take out the bare minimum of loans that you absolutely have to save. Do a little side job here and there for some extra spending money. Don't expect that student loan is going to have to get paid back at the end. So you take out as little as you can, but then have a plan. Have a plan for paying that back, managing the interest, understanding. A lot of my classmates, we graduated and we had no idea about loan repayment plans, and we just figured, well, we'll get a check, and so there are financial aid departments in all of the colleges. Go talk to somebody early. Take control over that so it doesn't become a stressor. Understand your purchasing power and what that means and what the loans mean. And so I just came from a week in DC, and part of the meetings I was there for were on with all of the health professions, talking about admissions trends and stuff. And this isn't something unique to our profession. I think students from all professions are asking these types of questions. And so it is on the hearts and minds of many folks, as well as their supportive, parents and loved ones. And so I will say that if you do have this in your heart and this is your passion, that you see there's a better way to, or this is the way that resonates with you for being a doctor, go after it, but then seek out the help to make sure that you're successful at what you want to do. Because we do have the resources, and I've met with the career counseling staff at every single one of the colleges, and would you know that their biggest concern and the kind of gripe that all the career folks have, and that they literally every single one of them mirrors, is the students don't come to talk to me until they're about ready to graduate. And at that point, not that it's too late, but you're already behind on a lot of the planning and the figuring out of things that you could have been doing throughout the course of the education. So I will say, if you are thinking of that and that is on your mind, please take advantage of every resource you possibly can. Talk to those career counselors, get the resume classes, have folks, get mentors, do all of this, put together your business plan, and get feedback on it. And so I would absolutely mirror that is really important. And I thank you for your honesty in that question. I know that was a little tough. So I really do.
And a lot of students, they graduate, and a lot of people say, oh, I don't know what my education was like. And I'm going to say this. My beginning of my career was in HIV care, and I sat on the scientific review committee at an AIDS organization. And so that's one. I did biofeedback. I go to these biofeedback conferences, which have tons of psychologists and some doctors and physical therapists. And I'm constantly reassured that our education is quite extensive. I know there's people in our profession who criticize that and say maybe it's not. But I will tell you, I've worked with medical doctors, side by side with medical doctors, and they're always amazed at what we know. So we really do get a great education at any of the schools. Of course, I'm going to say Bastyr is amazing, but because you're going to get the best biofeedback training at Bastyr with someone. But I will say, if that's a concern, I'd really look at it again, because I do think you get a really well-rounded education.
Yeah, the education is solid. And so I think for me personally, when I was considering a career and what I was going to do for school, in the back of my mind the entire time was, well, I want to be a doctor, but I recognize that nutrition is important, and so is the power of the mind on how we feel, and so is physical exercise and movement and all of that. And so this is really a path that incorporates all of that, and you get such a solid foundation. I was in DC, and I was with leaders this past week in the healthcare field talking about non-pharmacological approaches to pain management. And we had representatives there from the NIH, and we had representatives from Harvard and Yale, and every major institution in the Veterans Administration, and everyone recognized the component that naturopathic medicine, in addition to the other integrative approaches, what we bring to the table. And so, I think that this is an education, like I said, that it's an investment, and it really is so worth it. So, Dr. Lichtenstein, there was a question here about, in general, on the nervous system and all the different things that expose ourselves to and impacts on the nervous system. Can you speak a little bit about coffee? I know it is, caffeine's great for this and maybe not great for that. Can you speak to some of the impacts of caffeine on the nervous system?
Well, let's go back to naturopathic medicine. Since naturopathic medicine is individualized care, I'm talking about breathing, and I know I'm saying that we can train at 6 breaths per minute for almost everybody. Some of that's basic physiology. When we get to things like caffeine, everyone responds a bit differently to stimulants. I am not a coffee drinker. I am a tea drinker, but I'm also a matcha drinker, which is different than regular green tea because it has different components to it. Um, I do believe some caffeine is okay, but I'm not a big fan of too much stimulants, especially if you're talking about stress. If you are finding that your nervous system is one where you have more palpitations, if your breathing rate is really rapid, caffeine is going to increase your breathing rate, which is going to, just increasing your breathing rate is going to impact your nervous system. So we can talk about allergies to caffeine and reactions to caffeine, but I'm going to say that it impacts your nervous system and increases your sympathetic nervous system. So I'm not a big fan of it for people with certain conditions. And if you do suffer from anxiety, not going to recommend it. The thing I recommend, why I talk about green tea or matcha, not green tea, but matcha, which is now becoming very popular, is it's the whole plant. Unlike coffee and tea where you're steeping, you're getting an extract of it, you're having the whole plant, and matcha has more theanine, and more theanine actually promotes a more relaxed mental state. So that's why some people are using green tea powder. You don't get the same crash that you do with green tea, black tea, or coffee. So I would want to first talk to you about your whole nervous system and how you're responding to things, talk about your diet overall before I'd make a specific recommendation about coffee. But on the whole, not a big fan.
Thank you so very much. Would you mind putting up the slide with the upcoming events? I just want to make sure that
Yes.
Thank you. And there was actually just a question about from a student who is, I don't like to call them older students, I like to call them mature students. And so, and the question was, are there any folks in their 30s or 40s? And I will say,
yes,
not only in my class, I was actually the youngest of all of the classmates, but we had folks ranging from my age when I started school through their 50s, and I've counseled many career changers through the course of the years who have come to us after illness or after just understanding that this is a way forward for them. And so we actually are hosting a webinar next month with two MDs who changed tracks and became naturopathic doctors. But it's not just about MDs becoming NDs, but really just about changing careers and what that looks like. And so usually every January we host a webinar on that. We also have an archive as well of past webinars that we've done for career changers. So Dr. Lichtenstein, I don't know if you have anything to add about career changers. I'm sure you've seen plenty in your years.
Oh yeah, I would say, I don't know if I should say this, but it's like many of the students who are older adults are some of the best students to work with. And talk about stress, many of them, because they have a different life experience, are less stressed than some of the younger students, is what my experience is. And so the main challenges could be going back to school and studying. Sometimes they worry about that, but I have seen most of the students that were in their 40s, 50s do really well, and I enjoyed working with them.
Yeah, ditto. And I think, like you said, there's a different perspective, and it creates a very wonderful class dynamic as well, where the younger students are gaining some of the life experience from the older students, and the older students are seeing the types of questions that the younger students are coming. And so it creates I'm always a fan of diversity. I think that homogeneity in anything is a recipe for a hot mess. So I love to see diversity in our students, both in ethnic and religious backgrounds, as well as in age. And I think that in naturopathic medical school, because we use holistic admissions, we're really taking a look at the entire package who is coming. We're not just focusing on numbers. And some of those career-changing students bring so much to the table. You've held your own businesses before. You have, maybe raised families and, hired people and lost jobs and been fired. And you just bring such a wealth of information and that background to the learning experience that is really valuable. And so don't undervalue yourselves. So with that, I am going to, unless there are any last questions, or Dr. Lichtenstein, unless you have any parting words, I'm going to thank you so very much for coming today.
Thank you. And I enjoyed this. And if you do have any questions, I'm going to go back to that slide. If you have any questions, you can email me at my Bastyr email address. I also have a website, the Breath Space, where some of my guided meditations are there. You can also email me through that. So just wanted to share that with you.
Thank you so very much. I appreciate your time today. All of you who came today as well, thank you for coming and spending an hour with us at the AANMC. And with that, remember to breathe.
Thank you.
Take care. Thank you so much.